Samuel Prather here. We're going to take a deep dive into why you should be using a reference track if you're not already when you mix and master your music. What is a reference track and why in the world do I need one to mix? Welcome to A Reason to Create. I'm going to tell you today why, if you're not using reference tracks, you are wasting a ton of time and probably destroying your mixes. There are a few main reasons why I think that a lot of people don't use reference tracks. The first is they just don't know that they can do that. It's just not something that they were taught, and they mix as best as they can based on what they hear. To those people, I would say that reference tracks are going to cut down the amount of time that you spend mixing, because being able to hear a finished master will give you a much better idea of how to dial in certain things. You can hear other people's priorities in terms of what should be loudest, what should be panned which way, etc., etc. Obviously, when you start saying things like that, that comes into the second reason why a lot of people don't use reference tracks, which is they know what reference tracks are, but they think that for whatever reason, myself included, sometimes I've been there, my stuff is just so different, it's so original that there's no reference that can actually accomplish what I'm trying to do with my music. Hopefully you can pick up on the sarcasm there. There are so many records out there. My argument would be, if you can't find a record with close to the same instrumentation, genre, tempo, and just a mix that you like, that you probably just need to listen to some more music. Another category of people that we have to mention, of course, is people are just being lazy. Right? Lazy is not a permanent thing. You don't have to remain lazy if you have been lazy in the past. I'm preaching to myself. But at the end of the day, what you have to remember is that this is worth it and it will save you the time. Any time that you spend looking for a track to reference with is going to more than be made up for. You're going to get to hear a professional mixing and mastering engineer's work and their mixing priorities and the balance and everything and the panning. So just do it. The last reason why people might not use a reference track is because they don't know how. Whatever category of person you are on those that I just listed, the one thing that is certain is that you should be using reference tracks when you mix, for a couple of reasons. One is that speakers lie all the time. I'm sure many of you have had the experience where you have mixed something that you thought was just banging and then you put it on a CD. Do people still use CD? Whatever. You took it to the car to play and it sucked. That's a very common problem that a lot of people have. Mixing in mono fixes that to some degree, but also the other leg on the table of having a mix that'll survive the car test is using a reference. The second reason why you should be using a reference track is because if you're here watching this, you probably haven't mixed a hit record.
What you gonna do? What you gonna do?
Oh, me. Oh!
What you made?
Oh.
I'm not trying to step on anybody's toes. I'm not a hit maker myself, but we have to think about this. There's a reason why the people that have hit records have hit records. And if you don't have a budget to go and study with those people and be mentored by them, the best that most of us have as an option is to listen to their work. What happened on that Adele record that has the same instrumentation as the one I'm mixing that made it such a success? These are things that you can find out when you listen side by side, that you just can't figure out if you're just going by what you remember from it in the back of your head. Using a reference track is also a great way to get ideas for effects that you want to use and placement and EQ ideas and compression, etc. There's a lot of times when you are mixing a record where you're just too close to it, and getting a reference will allow you to put some distance between you and your own record and judge it more objectively. The other reason why you need to use a reference track is especially if you are using a non-optimal space to do your mixing. Of course, you should be using a completely sound-treated room, and the speakers should be set up in such a way that the vibrations from the speakers don't give you a false image, etc., etc. If you want to go into the technical side of the way that a room should be set up to mix, you can watch another video. This video is not tailored for people who have a $100,000 studio at their disposal. If you just have a couple studio monitors or you're mixing in headphones, it is important that you are comparing apples to apples and making sure that you are hearing what a professionally finished mix sounds like in the same system. The other reason why you need to be using a reference track is because it makes a ton less work for the mastering engineer. If you're not going to do the master, or yourself if you are doing the master, you don't want to take your mixed song into the mastering phase not even having heard any idea of what a finished master of that song should sound roughly like. Okay, so hopefully I've sold you on the idea of using reference tracks when you mix and master your own music. How to do so is really simple. You just want to choose a track that is in the same genre, roughly the same instrumentation, tempo, and vibe that you want. Once you have that in place in a high quality audio format, really important. Whatever DAW that you're using, all you have to do is bring your high quality audio file on a new track and mute it when you don't need it, and mute the rest of the stuff and unmute that when you do, so that you can, hear back and forth. There's different fancier ways that you can do it so that you can switch back and forth quicker. So you can put everything in a bus except for the reference track, and then just switch back and forth between the bus with everything and the reference track to kind of speed things up. There are some plugins, like for example, the Ozone from iZotope has a feature where you can reference inside of that, and you can just one-click switch back and forth, and it also has a makeup gain so you can listen to things at the same levels. But whatever is in your DAW is likely going to suffice. You don't need any special expensive plugin to do this successfully. A few things to look out for though. One, make sure that whatever your reference track is going to is not being processed or changed by the DAW. You don't want to be making decisions based on a false audio image. So if you accidentally run your reference track through some kind of processing, it completely ruins the advantage of having it there in the first place. So be extra careful about that. Don't rush. That's the second thing, right? So make sure that you are taking your time and listening at different volumes, etc., so that you can really get a picture of what's happening in your reference track before you go and try to put things in place on your own. Remember, yours isn't mastered. What you can do to make up for that is take a couple dB off of the reference track if you want to listen to them at the same level. Another thing to keep in mind is that your preferences in a reference track are not necessarily going to be the same if you're mixing for someone else. So ask them, what artists are they checking out? Who do they like? Sometimes artists might be touchy about you saying that their stuff is going to be derivative or sound like somebody else's. That's not what we're going for. We're going for a professional audio space to target while we're mixing. It is not the same as stealing a song or copying. It is just a reference. I remember recently I did a mixing session for somebody who wanted to sound kind of like Brian McKnight. Brian McKnight records in a very specific studio situation, and he has a very specific voice and etc. There's only so much like Brian McKnight I can make anybody sound other than Brian McKnight. What I could take from that is where Brian McKnight put his background vocals in comparison to the lead vocal, or how bright certain EQs were, compression, etc., things like that, reverb choices. These are the same things that you can take anytime that you're listening to a reference, and you should take advantage of that so you can just kind of take the easy button way to pleasing your clients. But even in the event where the artists themselves won't give you a reference to work with, you still can get an idea of what to do by looking yourself for Google. That's why I also recommend that you just have a couple references in the holster for different genres of music. You should be able to say, oh, well, for this acoustic jazz quartet thing, I'm going for a certain sound, like maybe it's Joshua Redman live at the Village Vanguard, or maybe it's like a Branford Marsalis record. But whatever genre of music that you're doing, you should have a ton of references that you like that you can bounce off the client as well if you're working with somebody else and say, well, do you like this mix maybe? I did a whole 4-part series on how to mix within Reason, my DAW of choice. If you want to check that out to get more pointers on how to actually mix once you get it there. But use a reference, I don't care what DAW you're using, because it is going to make a huge difference in the way that your finished product sounds. If you found something that I said today useful to you, something that you might want to try out, if it works, then come back and hit the like and subscribe button so you know when I'm coming out with new content. Maybe share it with somebody else that might benefit from it. Also, hop on over to SamuelPrather.com, get yourself some merch. All of that helps me make more videos. I'm Samuel Prather. I hope I gave you a reason to create.